The first time I entered Grayson Woods, I thought people exaggerated the stories. The place had a strange reputation for swallowing hikers, but I assumed it was just poor navigation or old trails fading away. I had been hiking for years, and I felt confident that I could handle anything a state forest could throw at me. The University Research Department assigned me to update wildlife records in several zones, and Sector 37 happened to include a large portion of Grayson Woods. My job was simple. Hike in, drop an audio recorder, then collect it a week later. Nothing dramatic. At least that was the plan. I arrived at the old ranger station in the early afternoon. The building had been abandoned for so long that tree roots pushed up against the walls, and moss covered half the roof. Every window was boarded up. The air smelled heavy, like wet leaves and something older underneath. I set off down the trail with my backpack and compass. For the first part of the hike, everything was normal. Birds called from the canopy. Twigs snapped under my boots, and sunlight filtered through in soft patches. But as I pushed deeper into the woods, the atmosphere changed. The forest grew quiet too quickly, as if someone pressed mute on the world. Even the wind stopped. I checked my phone and saw that the signal was gone, though that did not surprise me. What did surprise me was how wrong the light looked. The sun should have been overhead, but the forest felt dim, almost as if something thick hung between the branches. I kept walking until the trees thinned slightly, and I reached the location marked for the recorder. Everything looked ordinary at first glance, but then I noticed the ground. The soil looked disturbed in long, narrow streaks, like something had dragged an object through the area. I took pictures, set the recorder onto a pole, and left quickly. The air had a strange pressure to it, like the forest was leaning in to listen. When I returned a week later, the forest felt colder. Snow had fallen overnight, and the ground was coated in a thin white sheet. But something was wrong with the footprints. My own tracks were still there from the previous week, but beside them were new prints. They weren't human. They were elongated and impossibly narrow, spaced too evenly to belong to any animal I knew. They circled the recorder several times, looping in patterns that made no sense. I picked up the device and immediately noticed the battery indicator was still full. That never happened in cold weather. Typically, the battery dropped by half. I pocketed it and hurried back to the station, feeling watched the whole time. Back at the lab that evening, I uploaded the audio expecting static or normal wildlife noises. Instead, the first anomaly appeared 3 hours into the first night, a soft rhythmic clicking. The clicking lasted almost 7 minutes. It was faint but precise, too uniform to be an animal. The microphone picked up the sound as if something was tapping directly against the recorder's casing. After the clicking stopped, silence returned. But around 2 in the morning, the clicking came back, louder this time. It circled the recorder, moving around it in slow, deliberate steps. Then there was breathing. Not human breathing. It was deep, hollow, like someone inhaling through a long piece of metal tubing. And then, without warning, a voice whispered directly into the microphone. "Hello?" I paused the audio immediately. I replayed the clip again and again, hoping to identify something familiar in the sound. But the voice was layered, as if several voices were speaking the same word slightly out of sync. It carried a tone I can only describe as wrong. The waveform analysis flagged it as organic but unclassified. My supervisor leaned over my shoulder while I played it again and muttered that we would need to check the equipment for tampering, but no one had gone near that area for months. The recording continued, normally until 4 in the morning, when heavy footsteps began approaching the recorder. The steps were slow but heavy enough to snap branches under their weight. The microphone distorted slightly with each impact, meaning whatever was walking was massive. The footsteps stopped right beside the recorder. The breathing grew louder. Then the same voice returned. It whispered, "Where is the other one?" I felt something cold bloom in my stomach. There was no other recorder. There was nothing else placed in that area. The device had no context for that question, and the whisper sounded angry, almost disappointed. Then the audio cut out entirely. 10 minutes of pure silence. Not static. Total absence of sound. When the recording resumed, the forest was quiet again. But a new sound replaced the missing minutes. A scraping pattern. 3 slow scrapes, a pause, then 3 more, repeating steadily for almost an hour. The last recorded sound came at 5:17 a.m. Something walked away. The same long, narrow stride I saw printed in the snow. My supervisor insisted on another placement in the same area, but I refused to return. I claimed the trail conditions were unsafe. She assigned the task to a new volunteer who seemed eager to prove himself. He did not come back on time. Search and rescue teams entered Grayson Woods the next morning. They expected to find the volunteer near the marked trail, maybe injured or lost. Instead, they found his backpack neatly placed at the base of a tree. There were no footprints leading away from it. There were no signs of a struggle, just the pack sitting upright as if gently set down. The strangest part was the prints surrounding the area. The same long, narrow tracks that circled my recorder now circled the discarded backpack. The trees around the clearing bent slightly inward, creating a bowl shape that was not present on any aerial maps. The search captain said the forest felt like it was listening to them. The team spent 2 days searching before the effort was suspended. The volunteer was classified as missing, presumed dead. No one wanted to say it aloud, but that forest had claimed him. I tried to move on, but something bothered me about the missing 10 minutes in the recorder. It felt intentional, as if something had silenced the device during its interaction. A week later, something strange happened at the office. Security called our department early in the morning saying someone had left a package outside the entrance. A small brown box sat on the steps, no label, no address. Inside was a recorder identical to the model we used. It was covered in dirt and pine needles. Not our property. When we checked the serial number, we confirmed it was not one of ours. Under the battery was a note written in cramped handwriting. It said simply, "I found the other one." I knew immediately what that meant. Whatever was in those woods was aware of us. It knew what we were doing, and it knew where to find us. The supervisor assumed it was a prank until I showed her the exact handwriting from the original. Ranger logs stored in the archives. The ranger who last worked. Sector 37, 30 years ago, disappeared during a routine patrol. His handwriting matched the note exactly. That night I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty clearing, the narrow footprints, the phrase, "Where is the other one?" looping in my mind. I started wondering whether the forest had learned to mimic human presence, or worse, whether it had taken something from the missing volunteer and left a version of him behind. 2 days later, the police came to the lab asking questions. A hiker claimed he saw someone resembling our missing volunteer standing, motionless between the trees, near the old trail. When the hiker called out, the figure turned. The hiker said the face looked stretched, as if the skin did not fit the skull. I convinced myself I needed closure. Against all logic, I returned to Grayson Woods. This time, I did not tell anyone. I brought a flashlight, a new recorder, and a knife I hoped I would not need. The forest felt different the moment I stepped in. Heavier, quieter. The air had a strange metallic taste, like the world held its breath. I followed the old trail markers, though half of them had rotted into the ground. As I hiked deeper, the trees felt too symmetrical, spaced in patterns that nature would never create. The shadows stretched in ways that did not match the direction of the sun. Every few minutes I heard the faint clicking, always behind me, always just far enough that turning around showed nothing. My pace quickened. The deeper I went, the more certain I became that the forest remembered me. Eventually, I reached the clearing where the volunteer's backpack had been found. The ground was disturbed again. Long, narrow tracks circled the center. I placed the new recorder on the dirt, activated it, and backed away. Immediately, the clicking began. But this time, it did not circle the recorder. It circled me. I kept the flashlight steady, scanning the trees. At first, I saw nothing. Then a figure stepped into view. It was tall, too tall to be a person. Its limbs were long and thin, bending at impossible angles. Its skin was pale gray and seemed stretched over joints that protruded sharply. The face was the worst part. It looked like an unfinished mask. Smooth in some areas, wrinkled and collapsed in others. It tilted its head, imitating curiosity. Then another figure stepped out behind it. And another, 3 in total. They moved like puppets dragged by strings, their bodies jerking in unnatural pulses. They spread out slowly as if hurting me. I stumbled back and hit a tree trunk. The tallest figure leaned forward. Its mouth opened slightly. Then it imitated speech. It copied my voice perfectly. "Help me!" The tone was wrong, the pacing wrong, but it was my voice. Then it copied the volunteer's voice, a voice we had heard on training recordings for weeks. That is when I realized what the phrase, "Where is the other one?" really meant. It had been searching for another human voice to copy. The creature stepped closer. The clicking grew faster. I grabbed the knife, but my hand shook violently. The tallest figure's mouth opened wider, stretching far beyond anything natural. It leaned in and whispered in the volunteer's voice, "You are late!" I bolted into the trees. Branches whipped against my face. The clicking followed, echoing in dozens of directions as if the forest itself clicked along with the creatures. I tripped, scrambled back to my feet, and kept running. At some point, I lost my backpack and flashlight. I could barely see, but the dim gray light between the branches helped guide me. I veered toward the direction where the trail should have been, but the forest kept shifting. Paths curved in ways that did not exist before. Fallen logs blocked routes that had been clear minutes earlier. The clicking grew louder, closer, surrounding me. I ducked under a branch and nearly collided with something standing in the shadows. For a moment, I thought it was another creature. But then I realized it was my own reflection. Not a mirror, not glass, simply me standing in the forest, staring back. It blinked slowly, a fraction of a second off from my own blink. Its face twitched in broken expressions that did not match mine. I backed away and it stepped forward, its movements disjointed and glitching like corrupted video frames. I turned and fled again. The forest around me warped, trees bending inward, the path growing narrower. My breath burned, my chest ached, and my legs threatened to give out. Finally, I saw movement ahead. Something familiar. The ranger station. Somehow I had looped back to the entrance. I sprinted toward it and burst into the parking lot just as the sun began rising. The creatures did not follow past the tree line. They stood there watching, their bodies motionless, their faces slack and unreadable. I collapsed beside my car. It took several minutes before I could breathe normally again. When I finally looked up, the creatures were gone. The forest was still, quiet, normal, as if nothing had happened. I drove away without looking back. Later that day, I checked the recorder I had dropped in the clearing. Somehow it had been placed on the hood of my car overnight, neatly set beside the windshield. The recording consisted of one sound, a clicking pattern matching the cadence of human speech. At the end of the file, a new voice spoke. It was my voice, except I had never said the words that followed. "Come back. I have not slept properly since, and every night around 3 in the morning I hear faint clicking outside my window.